Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good day to all our viewers across the globe, and welcome to this extraordinarily special edition of Global Arena on my YouTube channel, Global Arena TV. I'm your host, Umar Isa Dandago. Well, my guest today and her work have to the core impacted the lives of countless number of people in her home country, and if, of course, applied and replicated elsewhere, would continue to profoundly do the same in other parts of the world. She is a hugely famous public figure working for one of the biggest and most revered institutions in the world that a lot of people, including me, have deep passion for and have deep passion to be at. Well, Rachel Aldred is, let me put it this way, an award-winning professor of transport and director of the Active Travel Academy at the University of Westminster in the UK. Well, for starters, Westminster is where the great British Parliament is situated. She is an expert in sustainable mobilities with a particular focus on active travel. That means walking and cycling. Very great. Her research has been funded by a variety of organizations, including the ESRC, NIHR, and many more, and also British Cycling and Sport England. She has won numerous awards for her work, including the ESRC Prize for Outstanding Impact in Public Policy in 2016. Well, I think that's a huge and kind of achievements. Congratulations, Ma, and more to come in the future, of course. One amazing thing about Professor Aldred is that she is a cyclist, meaning she rides a bicycle, just like me. Of course, I'm also a cyclist, but I believe that her bicycle is more expensive, looks more beautiful than mine. She's on my show right here, right now, to talk about the importance of riding bicycles and other things related to that. Remember, we celebrated the World Bicycle Day on the 3rd of June this year. Well, riding bicycles is something that is absolutely captivating and breathtaking, as you get a lot of benefits from that. That is why prominent world leaders like Boris Johnson, the Partygate guy, former British Prime Minister, David Cameron, another former British Prime Minister, Barack Obama, former US President, the 44th President of the United States of America, George W. Bush, among others, are not shy to be seen riding bicycles publicly. But the news is, which I believe is a bad news, but the news is, here in Nigeria, it is a sign of poverty when somebody is seen publicly riding a bicycle. It's either they are students struggling with lives, suffering, or they are totally poor, in abject poverty, in penury, in destitution. So what can we learn from these global celebrities, especially my professor, Professor Rachel Aldred, about riding bicycles? Well, Professor Rachel Aldred joins me now on the line from the UK. Thank you very much. Thank you enormously, Ma, for being on the show.
That's all right. Thank you for that very kind introduction. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, and many, many thanks indeed for agreeing to record the session. All right. Professor, before I start with the normal self-introduction, biography, stuff like that, let me put this question to you that I was once asked. The question is cycling a hobby or a necessity to you?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think I would say both, really, in that it's something that is important for me to get from place to place. I've never owned a car, so I tend to use public transport, walk and cycle a lot. So this morning I came into work by a mixture of train and bicycle, but also it's something that I really enjoy. I don't do an awful lot of sports. I don't go to the gym, and to be out, particularly today, the weather is very nice in England for a change. To be out, enjoying the outdoors, to be getting some exercise while I'm going from one place to another. It's ideally it's quite pleasant as well. So I think it's both. It's enjoyable, but it's also something that serves a function.
Yeah, well, what I mean by necessity, because I was challenged a couple of months ago that I was riding a bicycle, because I've been riding a bicycle for years. I went mostly to my senior secondary school, senior high school days on a bicycle. I went to the school with bicycle, and right now I go to the studio with bicycle. I go to an English academy where we teach English on bicycle. Like literally almost everywhere that I'm going, especially if it is not that very far, I go on my bicycle. And that's why some people challenged me. They said, that, okay, this is just a necessity to you. You don't have the money to buy a motorcycle. That is why you resort to using a bicycle. Is that the case to you? Or you just had the money, but you didn't, you just refused to buy a car?
I mean, I would say, well, firstly, on the cycle or motorcycle, riding a bicycle is much better for you than riding a motorcycle. So you know, it's very much better for your health because you're getting the exercise, you're getting the activity that you wouldn't get on the motorcycle. But for me, I mean, I suppose I could afford to buy a car, but I wouldn't. I mean, first of all, I work in central London. There's nowhere to park it. So it would be extremely stressful and expensive then to try and find somewhere to park it. To drive into work would take longer than it would by other types of transport. And it would, you know, it would again be quite stressful and quite unpleasant. And, you know, most of the things that I do, I can do by walking, cycling or by public transport. So I don't really feel, I've never really felt the need to have a car. I mean, I expect I could afford one, but I've never even really thought about it because there were alternatives that were available to me that I would rather use.
Maybe this is because there is not that great deal of distance between where you live, your house, and the University of Westminster where you teach, right?
Well, this has actually changed recently. It used to be the case. I used to have basically I used to have about a 7-mile ride from Hackney to Westminster, which was pretty perfect, you know, in terms of getting some exercise. It would take me about 50 minutes or so because I don't cycle very fast. So I would just, but the route was very nice. There were parks, there were cycle tracks, there were quiet streets. But I recently moved to Brighton, which is on the south coast of England, and that's too far to cycle. So what I do now is I get a train most of the way and then I ride the bike for the last bit. So now I do a mix of getting the train and using the bicycle. So, and I think a lot of people do that because in London, a lot of people live outside London or they live on the outskirts. So for many people, it's too far to certainly a traditional bike rather than an e-bike. So a lot of people do combine public transport and cycling, I think, to get to work in London. So I'm one of those people now. I do miss my old bike commute a bit. But yeah, it's a mixture. It's a mixture of bike and train at the moment.
So do you derive pleasure and happiness from riding your own bicycle, from cycling?
Yes, very much so. And also from walking. I mean, cycling, as long as the environment is pleasant, you know, if it's, so we have in London in 2016, we started getting some better bicycle tracks, like the bicycle track that I use when I get into London Bridge, I go over the river and then I cycle along. It's called the Embankment Cycle Path. It goes along the River Thames and it's really high quality. It's separated from motor traffic. It's separate from pedestrians. It's really smooth and wide. And it's so pleasant to cycle along there. You cycle along, you can see the river. It's just really pleasant. And then I turn north and I cycle up through Covent Garden. And that's not so much of a cycle track, but it's relatively quiet. It's an attractive area. There are small shops. And so, you know, the route through London is really quite pleasant and I enjoy it. I see the river, I see the shops, I see other cyclists. So that's really nice. But, you know, on the other hand, if I was cycling on an unpleasant, busy road with lots of fast motor traffic, it would be a lot less nice. So it depends on the environment. But for me, my route from London Bridge Station to Westminster University is mostly very nice.
That's great. So how does it contribute to your mental well-being, to your psychology? For example, you cycle from one place to another, seeing all those beautiful images, beautiful places, the gardens and the River Thames and so on and so forth. How does it how does it impact your psychology, for example? How important is it? Because like personally, I get to think a lot. Even this introduction that I composed, that I just read in the beginning of this program, I had to compose it while I was riding bicycle. So I tend to think a lot, and I tend to think deeply and faster when I'm riding a bicycle, because you don't get to be having random conversations with the people that are inside a train, for example, or a car or a bus or something like that. And you don't get to be distracted and disturbed by just unwanted conversations of politics and so on and so forth. So how does it help you psychologically?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I wouldn't like to say that cyclists are cleverer, but I would agree that we do think of, sometimes I think of ideas, I think of things to say, I think of things to write while I'm cycling. And it is a space often to have that space to think. And I think, and it does make me arrive at work, or, if I'm going on some errand or to visit people, then I arrive in a better frame of mind, often if I've had some cycling or some walking potentially as well, just to be able to be, out there under my own steam, enjoying the environment, hopefully. And, because public transport in London it's expensive, but it's quite good. But on the other hand, if you go on public transport in London at peak time, you'll be squashed in, it's smelly, it's hot, it's quite hectic and stressful. Yeah. And so even though it's good and I'm glad it exists, it's still, you get to where you're going, you're kind of sweaty and stressed and tired already. But if I cycle, I'm in a much better frame of mind, and I think it does really help my mental health. It helps me think about things. It helps me feel calm, particularly cycling, through a park or by the river, as I'm saying. It's a space to reflect. So yeah, I agree. I think it helps my mental health, and that is a real reason for it. And I certainly know if I was driving in a car from London Bridge to Westminster University, it would be horrible. It would just be really unpleasant. And I think cycling or walking is the best way to do that trip. Yeah.
Can you remember some of the ideas that you had to think of when cycling, and then you had to include them in one of your researches or something like that? Do you normally think about your work, your ideas, your research, for example, while cycling?
Yeah, I do actually, and I've certainly thought of ideas for research projects or studies or analysis while I'm cycling. I mean, sometimes I had a project that I led in 2014 and 2015, which was looking at cycling near misses, as I was calling them. So basically there's not an actual collision, nobody's hurt, but I'm sure as a cyclist you've experienced this as well. Something nearly happens, somebody overtakes you too close, or perhaps someone is tailgating you, or someone turns in front of you, or all those kind of things. And so I thought about this. I remember thinking about this when I was cycling, and probably after this had just happened to me, thinking, this happens such a lot and nobody records it, nobody knows how often it happens, we don't really know the impact. So I thought, well, it would be really interesting to do a study and look at how often these things happen. And then when I did the study, I found that there were very, very high numbers of near misses, and this is actually quite important to people. Obviously people shouldn't be injured while they're cycling or walking, but then if you're constantly experiencing these almost injuries, then that's quite stressful, and that's something that shouldn't be happening really, and puts people off. So yeah, some sort of ideas like that I often sort of think about while I'm cycling related to work. But sometimes it's just like what I'm going to cook when I get home from work as well, particularly on the way home when I'm hungry.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. I've also got to understand that most of the time it's our personal life that influences or that triggers the research work that we do. Had you ever, prior to engaging in that project called near miss project, had you ever been involved in that near miss, for example?
Yeah, I had experiences of near misses. I mean, I have I've been quite lucky in that I've never actually been hit by a driver while cycling and been injured, but I've had lots of sort of things almost happen to me. People swerve out of the way at the last minute. So I've had those experiences, and yeah, that's the thing about cycling as well. It can be, when it's pleasant, it can be so pleasant, so relaxing, as you can just have your own mental space to think. But then, if the cycling environment is busy, stressful, unpleasant, polluted, you are very exposed to that as well. But yeah, I have often thought about, research related to my own experiences and what I've seen out there. So, one of the things that interests me is the sort of inequality in cycling and who cycles. And when I first started cycling as a woman living in London, I didn't see that many other women cycling. So that was also of interest to me, like, why were there not more women cycling? Why was it only a relatively small group of people? So yeah, I think we often do. We see what's around us and we sort of think about our own experiences or things that have happened or not happened, and that gives us ideas, I think. Yeah.
There's even this issue of feminism in the field of cycling. Why is it? I'm kind of surprised and astonished as to why is it that as liberal as the city of London is, for example, why is it that there are no many women cyclists, female cyclists?
I mean, I think it's a pattern you see in a lot of different countries and cities. So there's a study that I was involved in, led by a colleague called Rahul Girl from the Indian Institute of Technology, and we looked at cities and countries across the world. And the UK is, not unusual in that a lot of places where there's not much cycling is marginal. You'll often get a big gender gap in cycling. But then if you look at countries where cycling is normal, where lots of people cycle, like, for instance, the Netherlands or Japan, you get an awful lot of women cycling. So I think, it's kind of a complex story, but I think one thing that's really important is that women and some other groups, like older people, express particularly strong desires for high quality cycle infrastructure. That, when cycling is seen as something that is extreme, that people only do if they're risk takers, that, you have to accept danger in order to cycle. That's particularly off-putting, I think. It's off-putting for many men, but it's off-putting particularly for women, and particularly often for older people and for children. So I think kind of creating cycling environments that are calm, pleasant, friendly, and so on, that is when you see more cycling generally, and you see more women cycling as well. So the place where I used to live in London, Hackney in East London, cycling is relatively, it's still got a gender gap, but it's more gender equal there. And Hackney is somewhere where it is relatively pleasant to cycle. It's got a lot of parks, it's got quiet streets, it's got, it's a relatively nice place to cycle. And somewhere like that, it's more normal for people of all ages and genders to cycle. You see more of a mix of people cycling. So yeah, I think in London we've still got quite a long way to go, but hopefully it is changing. We are seeing more cycling. I think we are seeing more diversity in cycling. But yeah, we've still got quite a way to go, I think, too.
Yeah, of course. So for the benefit of our viewers in Nigeria and in other African countries, talk us through some of the countries that have the highest level of cycling, for example. You talked about Holland, the Netherlands. You talked about Japan as well. Are there other countries that you can think about right now?
Sure. I mean, there's also high cycling rates in some other Northern European countries like Denmark and parts of Germany, parts of Belgium, and so on. And those countries, they tend to have, particular types of cycling infrastructure. So you often get the, high quality wide cycle tracks. If there's a busy road, cyclists don't have to mix with motor traffic. They have their own separate infrastructure, which, as I was saying, is particularly important often for women, children, older people, so that people can cycle in a relaxed manner and not have to dodge lorries and cars and so on. What you often get in those countries is, a network of quiet streets as well, so that a lot of the motor traffic is on the main roads, and you get a lot of, really quite quiet streets that are good for cycling as well, and also often park routes so that people can cycle through parks and along rivers. But basically in those countries, cycling is safe, it's pleasant, it's comfortable, it's something that's kind of a normal thing to do. You don't have to be willing to, cycle along a 50-mile-an-hour road with lorries. You have your own infrastructure. It's pleasant and calm. But we also, I think, it's not just it's not just the places like that we have to learn from, I suppose, as well. It's also places that have seen rates of cycling grow. So, I mean, obviously London is one example, but in Latin America, there's lots of quite interesting examples. So in parts of Chile and Mexico, we've also seen increases in cycling, which is also, I think, important and interesting to learn from, because, places where currently where cycling levels haven't been that high, have managed to increase them. They have built, Mexico City has quite a good infrastructure. They have bicycle lanes, bicycle tracks. They also have hire bikes. They have really interesting, I've forgotten the name now, but it's basically ciclovia, sort of Sunday cycling. They will close down large parts of the city to motor traffic on a Sunday so that people could cycle and jog and skate. So they have a sort of whole programme of things that they do. So I think we can also learn from some of those places that have managed to increase cycling recently, as well as the places where cycling has been high for a long time.
I understand that in some countries, especially in the United States, when we watch movies, for example, we see a place where bicycles are parked, and then one can just go, pay some money, some amount of money, and then pick up one. It's just like you're renting, right? They're hiring the bicycles. Does that happen in the UK also?
Yes, we have. I mean, we have different schemes. So in London, actually, this morning I used it because my regular bicycle had a puncture. So I used the cycle hire scheme, which has fixed docking points, and you take a bicycle from one docking point to another. So that's mostly in the central area, and you pay, I think it's £1.65 for a bicycle ride, which is kind of similar to the cost of a bus journey. And you've also got dockless bike sharing, so those are run by private companies, and they exist in some parts of the city but not others, and you also get them in other parts of the UK. But one of the problems with some of those private schemes is they tend to, they're not necessarily where you need them most. They're sometimes, in London, they'll be in some boroughs and not other boroughs, and it can be quite difficult sometimes to use them for your whole journey. But they are useful, I think, because people don't have to own their bike, they don't have to have it with them, and also they have the e-bikes, so the pedal assist electric bikes, which I think are quite important potentially particularly for longer trips, or if there are hilly cities or particularly hot cities. London potentially is getting hotter in the future with climate change as well, but also for people who maybe older people who can't cycle quite as far. So I think it's important because they also provide access to e-bikes, which many people don't have as well.
Yeah. So aren't there any fears that somebody could just rent a bicycle and then run away with it?
That does happen. Yes, there is. That does happen.
Does it happen certainly in the UK?
It does. Oh, it does. In fact, we even had in some cities like Manchester, we had operators withdraw because so many bikes were stolen. So we do have problems with that here too. I think, yes.
Okay, where are the police? Where are the police? What are they doing? Can't they? Okay, those bicycles, don't they have trackers that they can be tracked and located wherever they've been taken?
They can, but I think it can be challenging if you've got somebody, a young person, take a bike for a short journey and then abandon it, I guess. Yeah, maybe they need to improve security. But yeah, that has been a problem.
Yeah, of course. So let's talk about something. Okay, one funny question before I move on. There are so many bunch of questions that I have here. Do you normally, while cycling, put on earpiece, headphone, listening to music, for example, or something? Do you do that?
I don't at the moment. No, my route is largely, it's from Westminster to London Bridge, and one of the things actually is that there's a lot of other cyclists, and I can easily get distracted. So I like to be alert and be able to see all the other cyclists and so on. So I don't usually. Plus, it's quite short.
What about other people? Do they cycle while listening to music with the headphones?
Yeah, and I can understand why, because it provides a soundtrack. It provides a soundtrack for their journey. But personally, I don't. I tend not to do that.
But it's risky because you don't know whether another person is horning behind you. Somebody is coming behind you, and they're pressing their own horns, for example, slamming on their own horns, tooting their own horns, for example. You don't know whether somebody is coming from behind because you're distracted, you're busy listening to music. Isn't that risky?
I mean, I think you would certainly hear a car horn, even if you were listening to music or a program. I mean, I think what you find is that people tend to, it's a concept called risk compensation, that people often tend to listen to music, for instance, when they feel safer. They feel safer and they feel they can allow themselves a little bit of distraction. So I don't worry too much, because I think when people are listening to music, then it suggests that they feel more relaxed. So it suggests we're getting a more comfortable cycling environment. But yeah, I don't think anyone would be listening to music so loud they didn't hear a car horn. I would be surprised.
Okay. We are running out of time. We have like 15 minutes to go. So let's make it as brief as possible. I was speaking to one of my BBC contacts, and he lives in London. He told me that it's just normal in the UK to see people riding bicycle. And of course, you have just justified that. This is because, and he even said that the government, the authorities there are encouraging it, probably because of your researches and contributions towards the public policy. He said the reason is because, number one, it helps keep the environment clean. So bicycles normally don't produce smoke, fumes, and so on and so forth. And he says also it helps keep the roads less crowded and less congested. Number three, he says because of the health benefits to that. So the question is, does the government give any kind of incentive, sort of a token, for example, to the cyclists as sort of motivation for other people, to encourage other people to venture into cycling, for example? Does it happen?
I mean, I think a lot more could be done here. I mean, well, firstly, I think the government needs to spend a lot more on cycling infrastructure, because a lot of parts of the UK, it's really not that pleasant to cycle. A lot of our towns and cities, a lot of our rural roads are very dangerous and unpleasant. But in terms of support for individuals, I think more could be done as well. I think, particularly around, for instance, e-bikes, pedal assist bikes, people could be incentivized much more to use those. I also think that we could do more in the UK when cities are kind of introducing in low emission zones and introducing scrappage schemes. We could do much more to incentivize people to get rid of cars and take up bikes, take up public transport as well. So I think more should be done there. There are a few schemes, but I think we need to do more as well.
Yeah, but the government doesn't incentivize.
I mean, not directly. There is something called the Cycle to Work scheme, where for some people who are employed, you can get basically a kind of loan. It's a tax break. You get a loan to buy a bicycle, but it's quite limited. It's basically, you're only eligible if you work for some organisations. You have to have a certain type of job. So it's not, you're not eligible if you don't have a job. So, there are some schemes, but they're quite limited, I would say.
Oh, okay. Still talking about your near miss project, there's one thing that you indicated in the research, in the course of the research, the impact of the near misses on the mental health of the cyclists and their behavior and their reaction, for example. What more could you add upon that, for example? Because I read that it makes cyclists more aggressive and defensive, for example. But what more would you add about this, the impact of the near misses on the behavior and mental health of the cyclists?
I mean, I think some people probably just stop cycling. If you're experiencing something that's very scary on a weekly basis, for many people, they would probably just stop cycling. But yeah, I think it does make people feel defensive, feel threatened, feel, perhaps more on edge when they're cycling, maybe less likely to give way to pedestrians because they're constantly worried that that a driver is going to run into them, if they stop at a crossing or something like that. So I think it kind of generally does encourage people to, people to behave more, as you say, more aggressively or more defensively, because it feels like a hostile environment. I think if we can create kind of street public spaces that feel comfortable and calm, most people kind of react and behave in a more comfortable and calm manner. But if you feel like you're in a hostile environment, it's hard not to react in a hostile manner as well. So I think it does help shape the tone. And if drivers behaved more considerately, then I think that would help create a more pleasant environment for everyone.
Do you think that the drivers, for example, the drivers of those flashy cars and the motorcyclists also don't have respect for the cyclists, and that is why they sort of engage in these near misses? They tend to, if I can use this word, attack the cyclists?
Yeah, I mean, some of the work that I've done, I mean, I do think that cycling is still stigmatized in the UK and in many other countries as well, because it is seen as something low status. It's seen as something that poor people do, or, sometimes in the UK, it's seen as something that, environmentalists do or health freaks do. So, there are a whole lot of stereotypes, and people who cycle are often seen as weird, even if they're not seen as low status, low income, and so on. So people who cycle are seen as different. And, maybe that makes it easier for drivers to treat them badly. They see them as being different. They don't see them as being people in the same, quite like themselves. And I also think when you get a context where most drivers don't cycle, perhaps also it's hard for drivers to imagine just how close a close pass feels. Drivers will sometimes say, "Oh, I didn't hit you. What's the problem?" And actually, if someone has just gone past your shoulder with 6 inches to spare, you're often terrified. You get an adrenaline rush. Even though they didn't hit you, it's still really frightening. And I think perhaps people who don't cycle don't really appreciate that, or don't know people who cycle. So I think there's some prejudice and ignorance there, definitely.
All right, but does it land people in, like, what should I say? Does it make people develop anxiety and depression as a result of these near misses, for example? It happened to someone, for example, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Does it cause that?
I mean, I didn't directly measure anything as sort of, clinical as anxiety or depression, and I didn't follow people up, at particular points. So I'm a bit nervous about saying something too concrete, but people did talk about it having negative impacts on their mental health. I think so. Yeah.
But there's one point that you included in the research. It says near misses can be used as a proxy for collision risk. In other words, the more near misses that a cyclist experiences, the more likely they are to be involved in a collision in the future. I'm kind of interested in this specifically. Isn't this part scary? Aren't you scaring people away, for example, from cycling?
I mean, what I meant by that was more like looking at locations. So if we could measure near misses in relation to a crossroads, for instance, because what we often do in planning in the UK anyway, we don't improve a junction unless someone's injured. So, a junction isn't seen as being dangerous unless there are injuries. So the point I guess I'm trying to make there is that, if there's a junction where there's a lot of near misses, we could improve it before before people get injured. So that's kind of more the point I'm trying to make there about sort of places rather than about individuals. I mean, I think individuals' near miss risk didn't vary that much. I mean, for instance, women were slightly more at risk than men, but it wasn't a massive difference. It was too high for everyone, I would say.
Yeah, of course. So let's look at this issue from the perspective of role modeling. You are a cyclist, you ride bicycles, and I'm sure your students see you riding bicycles. You're very happy with that. Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London, was a cyclist, is still, I think, a cyclist. Former British Prime Minister also, Boris Johnson, the Partygate guy, David Cameron, Barack Obama, many other Western leaders. I don't know, maybe they take it as a hobby, but for Boris Johnson, a lot of people say that he's a cyclist. Do you think seeing people like you, like Boris Johnson, like Obama, like those guys, even Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary Clinton were once seen riding a bicycle, for example? Do you think seeing you would motivate more people who like you to join cycling also?
I mean, I think it's not the role model thing is not the main factor. But I think it's useful. One thing that I think is useful is for people to see people who are like them on a bike as well. So, you know, having more of a diverse mix of people cycling, maybe if people see, you know, people don't always have the same role models. You know, for some people, it might be a lecturer, for other people, it might be their church leader, or it might be their doctor or something. So, you know, people have different role models, I guess. So one of the when I did research recently with a colleague, Akwesi Osai, looking at experiences, particularly of black men cycling in London, one of the things that came out was seeing people who were not just white men cycling, seeing more of a diversity of people as well. So I think that's also important. And I think hopefully cycling in London is getting more diverse. You are able to see more of a mix of people. You do see more women than you used to. So I think that's hopefully helpful too. But, you know, role models, sometimes people think, oh, well, that's just that person. You know, that maybe they're eccentric. So it doesn't always work. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think I have this theory, correct me if I'm wrong. The reason why the women are not into cycling is because they are said to be naturally weaker than the men. Even for the men, there are risks attached, the near misses, the collisions, the accidents, and so on and so forth. Am I right to say that women are okay to feel afraid of cycling? This is because it's their own nature. I don't want to sound misogynistic.
I mean, I think one of the things that I'd say is that women, it's more seen as more acceptable for women to admit to being frightened. I think men are also frightened, but it's maybe less socially acceptable. So yeah, I would be nervous of saying that women are naturally one way or another. I think it's, you know, in a way it's acceptable for a woman to say that she's frightened to cycle, but for a man to say he's frightened to cycle, it's seen as less acceptable. So I think that's partly it. But I would say also, you know, cycling in large parts of the UK is a bit scary for many people, really. So it's not like it's great for men and terrible for women. I think there's a lot of commonalities.
Yeah. Do you like coming to Africa, especially Nigeria, to do a research about cycling?
It would be very interesting. I have peer-reviewed some interesting papers that look at cycling in Africa, and there's quite a lot of literature now. So it's clearly there is a lot of research interest. So yeah.
Yeah. I'll be happy to see you when you come to Nigeria, because we have a lot of issues to explore here. There are no women cyclists. In fact, if you see, there was a time when we used to see, was it a 10-year-old or 13-year-old girl riding a bicycle from her home to her school? It became news. Like, everybody would come out and look at her to see, oh my God, this is a Hausa Muslim girl riding a bicycle. And of course, she was wearing a very good dress. She was dressing decently, covering all parts of her body, as Islam has it, for example, commands us to do. But it still is a news here. You hardly see women riding bicycle, of course, on our streets. Yeah, but right now, the men that are riding bicycles are doing that because of a necessity. There is a rise in fuel costs, in the cost of fuel. The petrol is very expensive, very costly, and the life here is also very miserable also. That is why many people have resorted to using bicycles. But the bicycles now have, you know, their prices have skyrocketed. They are now very expensive, way more expensive than they were when I bought my bicycle in 2020 at the cost of, was it 15,000 naira? I don't know, probably something like 15 pounds or so. But right now you're gonna have to spend about 100 pounds. No, not 100 pounds, probably 50 pounds or so to buy your own bicycle. Very, very expensive, of course. So whenever you feel like you come to Africa, especially to Nigeria, to do research, we'll be looking forward to having you.
Thank you very much, and it was lovely to speak to you.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think it's time to wrap things up. What is it that I have not asked you about regarding your research, regarding cycling, and so on and so forth?
we've covered quite a lot. I mean, I would maybe just say quickly that there's a long way to go still in London, and even more so in the rest of the UK. But in London, we have seen a big shift away from the car. There's been a big decline in driving. There's been an increase in public transport, an increase in walking and cycling. So I think it does indicate that this is possible, and hopefully a way forward for cities that, a large, growing, rich city like London can see a shift away from the car, and that hopefully the future is more walking, cycling and more public transport, because we can't fit more and more cars in this city. So yeah, I'm kind of reasonably hopeful, but I think a long way to go yet.
Yeah, especially because now the world is struggling to achieve the net zero stuff, of course.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. So what can you say about my show and the style of questioning kind of?
Yeah, no, it's been an interesting interview. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your preparation and your introduction and the questions. It's been very interesting, and yeah, I wish you all the best show going forward, and your research and work.
Thank you very much, and I hope my English is quite understandable and clear.
Oh, it's very good. Yes, thank you very much. There's no problem at all understanding that.
Rachel Aldred from the University of Westminster in London. Thank you very much indeed for speaking on the show and for agreeing to record the program. Thank you very much, Ma.
Thank you very much, Umar.
Of course, on behalf of everyone that has contributed to the production of the show, my name is Umar Isa Dandago, and I'm saying goodbye and see you very soon.